What is up, guys? So today we are back with another deep dive. Today diving deeper into the Nightmare Cup meta, actually taking a look at a pretty highly requested Pokemon today, one that's kind of interesting because of its legacy moves. So let's actually go over Poliwrath in this deep dive today. So Poliwrath is actually a fighting and water type Pokemon, kind of unique with its typing there. But at level 40 with 15s across the board, you can max out at 2586. So that actually sets up Poliwrath to be an amazing Pokemon in the Ultra League. Unfortunately, we're talking about Great League today. You can actually achieve a 1498 at level 22 if you have a 0 on attack, 14 defense, and 15 stamina for your IV spread there. That does yield you the maximum stat product under 1500 for your Poliwrath. Based on my spreadsheets and all the math that I have done, Poliwrath should rank somewhere close to 11th in bulk and 8th in stat products. So pretty respectable numbers there, definitely achieving a very high tier in terms of both bulk and stat product inside the cup. Now, when we move on to our moves here, this is kind of where Poliwrath gets a little bit interesting. I did not write all of his possible moves up here, but I did choose the ones that I think are the most interesting and are worthy to talk about today. So the only fast move that I left off is actually Rock Smash. The reason that we left out Rock Smash is because of its poor performance in the energy area, where we compare it to both Bubble and Mud Shot. Bubble is just far superior in terms of energy gain, and then Mud Shot is even more on top of that. The only charge move that we actually end up leaving off is actually Submission. Submission is actually a legacy move, and even though it's legacy, even though it probably does warrant some discussion somewhere, it's kind of just whenever it comes to like its damage. It does cost more than some of our other moves. Its damage per energy ratio isn't nearly as high. It's just kind of a middle of the road kind of deal. So that leaves us with the moves that we have written up here. So let's actually go over those really fast. In our fast move area, we do actually have Bubble and Mud Shot written down here. So these moves are color coded to fit with our typing to kind of show off our stab effect. So Bubble here coming in at 3.67 energy per turn, very respectable, with a 2.67 damage per turn, which isn't quite like huge, but after you factor in stab, it does go up to a 3.2, which is pretty respectable. Now we also have Mud Shot, which actually clocks in at 4.5 energy per turn. Holy cow, that's huge. We do only end up with 1.5 damage per turn, so that is kind of the drawback there. But with gaining tons and tons of energy, you really have more of a chance to be using these charge moves way faster whenever you talk about using Mud Shot. So my preferred move is definitely Mud Shot if you can get a hold of one. The problem though is that it's kind of rare in terms of people that still have a legacy Poliwrath. So there could be a case made for Bubble that actually could end up doing okay. The simulations that I ran with it do fall a little bit. It does fall behind in terms of like how good it does, but it doesn't fall far behind. So most of the matchups in this cup with either of these moves are going to be neutral to a lot of the actual Pokemon in the cup. So you're not really missing out on much of the super effective damage. There are a few Pokemon that do take super effective damage from Mud Shot rather than from Bubble. The case could be made that if you don't have Mud Shot, Bubble could be comparable if you really want to run Poliwrath. I definitely would prefer to have Mud Shot on it, but Bubble could work for you. Moving on to our charge moves here. So first and foremost, the most important charge move here is Power Up Punch. Having Power Up Punch is huge. It's a big honkin' move for its attack boost. Every Pokemon that we're going to talk about this month that has Power Up Punch, I'm going to say it over and over again. Power Up Punch is the reason that that Pokemon is being featured. It has amazing stat boosting potential. It really does make or break some of the matches. Here lately, I recorded some Kingdom Cup battles, which you guys probably saw 2 days ago as of this video, and I mean, Lucario with Power Up Punch is just mind-boggling. It gains so much attack that it just wrecks things that it shouldn't have any business wrecking. So Power Up Punch on Poliwrath here, definitely gonna be the most preferred charge move in my opinion. Now we also do have Hydro Pump here. We definitely want to go with Hydro Pump to get these type of numbers, the most widely spread matchup percentages, but there is a case to be made about both Ice Punch and Dynamic Punch here. So similar to how Bubble was used as a neutral move whenever we're talking about like being neutral to most of the meta, Hydro Pump's going to be neutral to most of the meta. Ice Punch is also going to be neutral to a lot of the meta, but it does have some use cases with the grass types, it has some use cases with the flying types, and a couple of other things that may sprig up here and there. So Ice Punch could actually be pretty good considering that both of these only cost 40 to fire off. Like, holy cow, you could build an extremely fast shield busting Poliwrath and just take out shields like it's nothing. Having Ice Punch on a Pokemon that is not expected to have Ice Punch could be huge. That could be immensely big for some like complete mind games. Just thinking ahead here. In terms of Dynamic Punch though, Dynamic Punch is kind of the more secure move whenever you're just trying to dish out tons of damage. If you're just really looking to make a specialist out of Poliwrath, really help take down all of the freaking dark types in this meta, then Dynamic Punch may be more up your alley, considering that it's going to hit for super effective damage on a lot of the dark types, not all of them, but a lot of them. Dynamic Punch may be your route to go. Personally, for me, I definitely chose Mudshot, Power Up Punch, and Hydro Pump for these numbers here, okay? So all of the simulations done in this video are using those three moves. Hydro Pump was there as a huge neutral damage finishing move in a lot of the matchups. If it could have used Hydro Pump, then it definitely used it to finish off the match. There are tons of Pokemon that whenever they drop a shield, Hydro Pump just does tons of neutral damage in this cup and literally can clean up certain Pokemon. Really fast, let's run through these moves here. I've talked a lot about them already, so I'm going to try to hurry through this. Power Up Punch, 40 energy, 45 damage for a 1.14 damage per energy ratio. Nothing huge, we've talked about it before. Boosting it with Stab does make it quite a bit better at 54 damage with a 1.35 damage per energy ratio. Hydro Pump here, 75 energy for 130 damage. That's big, with a 1.73 damage per energy ratio. Of course, being a water type move, we do get a stab boost off of that, boosting it to 156 damage with a 2.08 damage per energy ratio. Ice Punch here, our only non-stab candidate that we're talking about today, 40 energy for 55 damage, pretty respectable at a 1.38 damage per energy ratio. Lastly, Dynamic Punch here, 50 energy for 90 damage. That's crazy at 1.8 damage per energy ratio. After you factor in Stab, 108 for 2.16 damage per energy ratio is crazy. That's a big damage per energy ratio. I definitely think that Dynamic Punch deserves a little attention if you're putting it towards this kind of specialist role. Just a thought. So moving on to our shields here, let's actually talk about how we perform against the cup. So in a 0 versus 0 shield situation, so a mock-up like closing situation here, 41.8% is pretty respectable. Our next scenario is 2 shields versus 0 shields. So whenever I have 2 shields and my opponent doesn't have any shields, we actually end up winning 83.6% of those matchups. Now those wins aren't necessarily what I'm looking at there. I definitely want to know when I have complete shield advantage, which Pokemon just flat out end up beating me. I want to know which ones just have complete advantage no matter how many shields I have. Well, most of the losses that come in this area are by Confusion users and Razor Leaf users. So basically, if they can exploit this crazy weakness that we have coming with water, things like Shiftry already have a huge advantage being able to output tons of damage, but then it becomes super effective to us, so kind of big. Confusion also exploits this fighting weakness here, so a lot of the confusion users out there end up just beating us down without having to worry about our shields. Our next scenario is a 0 versus 2 shield situation. So when I have no shields and my opponent has 2 shields, we actually end up winning 10.4% of those matchups. And those wins are extremely important because that means I don't care how many shields you have, I'm still going to beat this Pokemon. And I like to look at that. So basically the ones that show up in this list are basically either weak to Mudshot or they're weak to Power-Up Punch. So some of the darks end up showing up here, even though they can shield the Power-Up Punches. As long as they can't get over too many of them, they're pretty much secure. And then weak to Mudshot, things like Lucario that ends up being weak to ground, things like Toxicroak that are also weak to ground, end up falling to our Mudshot here because we just basically get to beat them down and not have to worry about shields. Our last scenario is actually a 2 versus 2 shield situation. So in a mock-up like lead-off situation, we actually end up winning 52.2% of our matchups, which is nice to see. So that does actually mean that Poliwrath does prefer to be an opener in this scenario, which is cool. I always like to see Pokemon that prefer to be leads rather than closers. Now let's actually shift over from our shields and talk a little bit about our matchups. Now just a quick disclaimer, everything that's written on this board is done with a 1 versus 1 shield situation to kind of give the most fairness to both Pokemon in this situation. Now when we talk about our matchups, what I like to do in all of our deep dives is I take our subject Pokemon, being Poliwrath today, and I throw them up against the top 10 bulkiest Pokemon to see how well they can do against all that bulk that's in this cup. Well, Poliwrath has some interesting things here. It's pretty even in terms of win-loss ratio, but it's kind of awkward still. So we have Umbreon, Wobbuffet, Alolan Raticate, Metang, and Grumpig. And you kind of see that there's a trend here. So Umbreon, Alolan Raticate both end up being dark types, which fall to Power-Up Punch a lot. Basically any fighting type damage that we can output is just great. At worst, we're at least going to be able to push Hydro Pump and Mudshot, which are both neutral. Then we actually have Wobbuffet and Metang and Grumpig. So none of these actually end up having confusion, which is, if you can remember from our shield situation, we end up losing to a lot of the confusion users. So these three are a-okay in our book. We don't really have too much trouble with them. But when we move over to our losses, this is where it gets interesting. So you can kind of see here that every single one of these Pokemon end up having confusion. And that ends up meaning that we just flat out end up losing to confusion. It is such a powerful move in this meta. I think that it's not necessarily the psychic typing that is so good this meta. I think it's the confusion users that are so good. If you have confusion on a Pokemon, I definitely think it automatically has some kind of like participation award. It has some kind of plaque that it can put up on the wall because it already has such an amazing move. It just needs a couple of more things to really push it to be completely viable in the meta. Let's actually move on to some counters here. So what should we actually be using our Poliwrath for versus what should we actually bring to the table to counter a Poliwrath? Well, what we should actually be looking for is targeting the dark types. As long as it's basically not Shiftry and Honchkrow, for what it's worth, Nuzleaf and Murkrow also do really well here. Basically, we can take out the dark types as long as it's not those. So we're pretty much clean cut on the dark types. You just kind of have to watch out for a couple of unique matches. Psychic types though, we can actually use our Poliwrath to target some of these psychic users as long as they're not confusion users. You do have a pretty easy matchup with them. Some of them do get a little bit more difficult, but mainly as long as it carries a non-confusion type fast move, you'll be alright. In terms of the fighting types, you can actually beat most of the fighting types, but you're really looking for things that take super effective damage or at least take tons of neutral damage from your moves here. So things like Lucario, Toxicroak, which we've already talked about, things that take a lot of neutral damage from us end up being pretty easy because if you look at Poliwrath's stats are pretty crazy. I mean, he has a big HP pool, he has a pretty large defense, and his attack stat is right there behind it. So his stats are actually pretty great. When you talk about base stats, it's pretty crazy. On the flip side though, what you can actually take to counter a lot of the Poliwrath are some of the fighting types. Now I noticed a big pattern here. Basically, if your fighting type has access to cross chop, it's such a low cost move that it can be so spammable that it does really well here. It does really well up against Poliwrath. It's kind of crazy, but basically cross chop is a big winner, or if you're able to just kind of push some super effective damage. There are some fighters like Gallade who can push super effective damage, and let's see, what is it? Hitmonchan has access to Thunder Punch. There are a couple of unique cases that definitely I think that Poliwrath can fall to in the fighting lineup. Also, you can actually just bring Confusion. You don't even have to bring a Pokemon, you could just bring Confusion, the move, store it in a TM, throw it at Poliwrath, and you've pretty much won the battle. Last but not least here, let's actually talk a little bit about some pros and cons about our Poliwrath here. Well, the only con that I actually have written down is that it's not super amazing unless you have Mudshot. So I do think that Mudshot is a big integral piece to Poliwrath here. I did say that you do have some cases where Bubble is okay. It just doesn't quite live up as well as it could be with Mudshot. So if you're one of those type of people that love to min-max and you can't get a hold of Mudshot, I don't think Poliwrath is really going to be for you. But if you're that person that doesn't necessarily mind, or you have some, you know, sentimental value towards Poliwrath, Bubble should be okay in certain scenarios. Just remember that you're not going to be able to get to these charge moves quite as fast, but you'll still be able to do a decent job with Poliwrath. In terms of our pros though, Poliwrath with Mudshot, holy cow, is it freaking fast. 4.5 energy per turn means that you get to both Power Up Punch and Ice Punch in less than 5 seconds. It takes 4 of them to get to freaking Power Punch and Ice Punch. That's crazy. That's crazy fast. Like 4 seconds, that's holy cow. That's literally like Body Slam on Celio fast. Like that's really, really quick. Which kind of leads into the next thing, is that we actually have options. If you think about Ice Punch, Dynamic Punch, Hydro Pump, you kind of have several different charge moves that you can work with here, which really makes this Poliwrath be able to be built to kind of fit your needs. Oh, I definitely need to carry something that's going to be super effective towards flying types. Ice Punch, it's going to be good. Oh, I definitely need to carry something that's going to be even harder hitting towards these dark types after they waste shields. That Dynamic Punch right there. Oh, I need to just have tons of neutral damage for better coverage because I've got several specialists on my team that just, they're too narrow. Hydro Pump, boom. He has options. He has this small little kit that can actually be tweaked and turned into something that will fit your team very nicely. I think that Poliwrath deserves a lot of attention just based on his versatility. He's crazy versatile, and I think he deserves a look at to fit into your team if you don't already have a fighting type set in stone. So that is actually all that I have for Poliwrath today. Kind of a longer deep dive, but I did actually choose to do a lot more research in this one for some reason. I don't know why. But that is actually going to be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. Next up on the dock, we do have some different, hopefully it's not just going to continue with the fighters. To be honest, I'm getting, I want to look at something that's not a fighting type. Next up on the list, we do have Skuntank, Xatu, and Hypno. So, being that there's no fighters in those next 3, I'm just gonna go in that order. Skuntank will be tomorrow's deep dive unless there are some crazy votes put on this video before I get to it. So, that's up to you guys. If you guys have any suggestions on deep dives that you're wanting to see, please comment down below. I'll be happy to look into them. I'm thinking that maybe this weekend I'll probably throw up some versus videos. I'll go ahead and start to try to work through those. Considering I have 2, 4, 6, 7 of those, I think if I do like 3 weekends worth, I can probably find a 4th one to make 4 full weekends. But that should actually be pretty much squared away. That's 5 deep dives a week. That's 2 versus videos every week. Plus there's going to be little other things sprinkled in through here like practice videos and tournament recaps that are coming up very soon. The Kingdom Cup's coming up this weekend, so that'll happen. But yeah, that should be a pretty good plan. I hope you guys agree. So that is actually it for today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. If you guys like to like videos, make sure you do that. If you don't, I don't care. Otherwise, if you have anything to say, let me know what you have to say down in those comments below. And until our next video, I will catch you then.